right, I got one person, not just me. Hopefully we get at least a few more. Who do I have here? I see Angel is here. I would encourage you to turn on your video if you're comfortable doing that. All right, how's it going, Angel? You might have to unmute yourself. Gotcha. Can you hear me? Okay, so I see we've got Sandy here too. And again, if you're comfortable, yes, I see your video and your faces. You guys can sort of like unmute yourself if you have questions. Hopefully we get a few more, but even if not, then we can have like a great open office hours just with you guys. So I guess first off, how are you guys holding up? How are you doing with the lessons and the labs?
Okay, doing okay.
Yeah, where are you at right now, Angel?
I'm working on the methods and default arguments.
Gotcha. Cool. And then did you have questions about that, or is that kind of going all right?
So far, it's going pretty well. I got stuck on the last one, but I kind of figured out what happened. I forgot to put the word I in.
Okay.
So it had me stuck for about 5 hours trying to figure out what I did wrong. So after that, I'm kind of good.
We all have that moment with code and technology. I kid you not, I spent like an hour trying to figure out how to share this Zoom recordings with you guys yesterday. It's a low point of my day. So I wish I could say that gets better, but it's more like you get better at the easy stuff and then there's new hard stuff, right? That's kind of part of the journey of coding, right? How about you, Sandy? How are you holding up?
I just had a meeting with my other job, so I'm just trying to still figure out how to submit the methods and arguments lab. So I guess a little bit behind, but just gonna chug all through tonight and try to get more ahead.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And then how about you? Is it Rabia or Rabia? I don't know that we've met one-on-one yet. How are you?
Hello.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm great. I'm just diving in, and question about on that orientation video, he had a track like to show you how many you should be doing per day to be, where do we get that? Where do we find that track? I looked on the homepage and I didn't see it.
You said where do you find like the actual track where your lessons are, or like that actual like breakdown?
Yeah. I saw you posted. You also posted it in writing in Slack, but yeah, it was some type of chart like Monday 6 to be done by Friday. It was like 6 on Monday, should be after 15 on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. Where is that track that he had written up there anywhere else besides the video, or?
So it should be if you go into let me go ahead and share so that I have to remember to share sometimes, otherwise I'm like talking like you guys can see what I see. So there's a lot happening here. So like here's our channel. We're gonna ignore all this stuff that's not for you. Okay, so like I think if I'm following you, it's like it should be in our original Slack messages for the day. There should be a breakdown, right? So like for today, you just had to have this piece down. And then like if you go scroll up to yesterday, there's kind of like the lessons for that day. I can also find the actual document because I think that should be shared somewhere. I can share that with you. You can also, if you go into like LearnCo in your dashboard, it will give you a sense of where you should be.
Okay, right. Dashboard.
Yeah, because I think we got you in the right track yesterday, so that got all sorted. But there's a ton of information on that dashboard. If you go ahead and scroll down, in terms of like what like
I have that.
Yeah. So I can find that document and send that to you. Can you say your first name for me?
Rabia, Rabih, last name Hogan, Hogans.
Okay, lesson breakdown. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
Just to ask a question if I'm doing like some of the lessons and I need help, right? Just
Okay.
just click on ask a question.
Yeah, so you have a few different options as far as getting help. I would say probably in general, your best place to go for immediate help is in ask a question, because they have a certain set of ways that they're taught to like help you talk through problems. Sometimes they're really busy though, so I also encourage you, like in our cohorts channel or in the general Slack channel, you can ask questions so you guys can help each other. I'm happy to help you guys too, but like sometimes I'm in meetings or I'm getting ready for study groups, so I can't always do that right away.
And lastly, is there a document help us with the Ruby terminology as far as like def and put, or it's just following the slides? I mean the lesson.
Yeah, I think it's mostly following the lesson. You'll also see I posted a video of the study group I did earlier, which talks through that a lot.
Oh, right. Okay. Right.
Okay, so that's already loaded, right? How about you, Angel and Sandy? Like these open office hours are kind of like whatever we want to make them, right? We can look at things that you guys are having trouble on, any general questions that you have. We can do code challenges, but it's kind of like really a place where I'm hanging out and you guys are coming and saying like, hey, can we do this? Like whatever I need. So I want you to feel sort of comfortable like directing that conversation, right? So.
Dominique, I'm sorry. Yeah. I do have one more question. It looks like your schedule is all booked up to meet the requirement for the first mile.
Okay.
So if I have it with Katie, it goes towards my one-on-one session required, right?
Yep. So for these first miles, it's just with either one of us, just because there's so many of you guys, we're splitting you up just for right now.
Okay. And okay.
Got it.
And Rabia, over Slack, I sent you I think what you're looking for, what Dominique had sent us, like the 6 lessons, 15 lessons. Just
awesome.
Out of that, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah. You said it's in Slack?
Yeah, your direct messages on Slack.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome. I think John just joined us. We're just sort of talking about the purpose of office hours. It's really a time for you guys to come and bring your questions, right? Any things that you guys want to talk about in regard to your code or any labs. I'm happy to answer your questions, or we can do code challenges. It's kind of whatever we want to do at that time. It's mostly unstructured.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. So maybe a nice little thing to do sort of as an icebreaker, right, of getting to know you, since it's just a few of us, right? If each one of us can sort of introduce themselves and talk about like, so the prompt for today is, if you were famous, what would you be famous for, right? So I would say give yourself a little think time, take 30 seconds, and then we'll kind of go in whatever order like we want to, whoever wants to go first, right? Just to make it fun, because we're potentially going to spend a lot of time with each other over the next 10 months, so might as well start getting comfortable. Okay. So I'll say take 30 seconds. If you were famous, what would you be famous for? I have to think about it too. I have to be on the hook as well. If I were famous, I'm gonna take it as like, if I could be famous for something, what would you be famous for? We have 10 more seconds to feel a little discomfort, a little thinking. Okay, I can go first. This is more like in a perfect world. I think I've always wished that I could be like an amazing dancer and be famous for that, right? I didn't really get that skill set. I'm like taking dance classes with my husband now, and we're like, okay, but like if I could have an alternate reality where I'm like famous, I could be like a really intense dancer. That'd be cool.
Wow.
Right? It's kind of a random thing. Yeah. And my name is Dominique. I think you guys know that, but that's part of it too, to introduce yourself, right? Who wants to go next?
I'll go next, Rabia.
Okay.
Okay. Rabia Hogan. I'm from New Jersey. I live in Arizona, and if I were famous, is it what you wanted to be when you grew up as a child, or what you want to be now, or it doesn't matter?
It can be whatever you want it to be.
I would be an political like advocate or figure for people less fortunate or disabled and stuff like that, to speak out for politically for needs that are things that are needed for people that are less fortunate.
Yeah, that's powerful, right? You can sort of do that with code as well, right? Depending on kind of what you get into after you graduate, right? How about the rest of you guys? Sandy or Angel or John?
I'll go next. I'm Sandy, guys. And something I'd maybe be famous for, I love to bake. So maybe for baking the healthiest chocolate chip cookies. I have a really good recipe. I'm like dairy free, so I can't make anything with all the delicious butter and milk and everything. So I have to use like coconut oil and like special kind of dairy free ingredients. So maybe that, or singing. I love to sing. So maybe like singer American Idol or something.
It's funny, that took a sharp left turn. You were like, baking. I want to be famous for like my healthy chocolate chip cookies. So that's Angel or John?
Okay, I'll go next. If I could be famous for anything, it's probably be famous for knowing a lot of people.
Okay.
I have a very, very wide network of people that I can kind of like place hands with, in a sense, or that just kind of know my place off of me randomly running up to them. So I'd probably be famous for that.
Okay, you're going to be all up in our Slack channel then. Right? Networking. Okay, and then John, hotspot now. You're the last.
I have no clue.
That's totally fine, right? You could. It's more to start a conversation.
I've been all over. I've been in the electrical maintenance. I've been in telecom. Now in the coding. So.
Yeah.
So whatever pleases me, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, for sure, right? Just kind of like getting a fresh start, trying new things, seeing what that takes us. Where are you at currently in your lessons, John? How's the course treating you?
I'm finished with the 80 classes.
Oh, you're all done the 80
for this week. Yeah.
Gotcha. Did you transfer from another cohort?
Nope.
Oh, you're just a rock star. Okay, that's good to know too, right? And again, we have people of all different levels, so that's part of why it's so great that we can kind of meet and be helping each other, right? Is there anything I can help you guys with? Do you want to take a look at a particular lab? We can do like code wars or something like that. I know, Sandy, you said you were having some issues with your lab. If you want, we can kind of share your screen and debug together if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'd love that. Just if you guys could help me with my methods and arguments lab, just trying to find what bug, why it won't submit.
Got it. Go for it. So I'm going to go ahead and unshare, and we can take a look at what you've got. All right, so then, okay. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about this error that you're getting? If we look at your error, what do you think's happening?
So,
yeah, just a bit.
It has to do with like, I see interpolation and the hi, my name is Josh pops up. I'm also just kind of having trouble like reading the errors, like understanding like what you get out of the errors and why they're important.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. And I try to Yeah, I try to underscore because sometimes students, they just get hung up on the fact that they have errors and they get really discouraged and frustrated. But think about errors as like your friend, you're getting data from that, you're responding to it, right?
Okay.
So the first thing I would do, just like you had before, I would scroll up to the top of the errors where it had that general description. So right above the number 1, like right down here a little bit more, just so we can see kind of the full thing, right? There's a lot of information just here. So one thing this tells me is that we've got a couple of tests here and there are 2 different methods that are being tested, right? This hashtag here indicates a method that the test is looking for. So we're looking specifically for a method called introduction, which you have. And then another method called introduction with language. So that would be a second method. So one thing here is that you've got one method defined, but still have another one that you have yet to define, right? You won't see this test light flip until you've passed the test, like each one that's in that file, okay? Let's scroll down to your very first error, right? It said number 1, right? There's a lot going on here. And again, it takes some parsing, right? There's sort of where it tells you like what exactly is happening, right? So this is the general error. The tests are calling your method, right? They're passing an argument and they're saying in response to that, I want your method to output this specific string, right? So that's sort of what's happening there in that piece, right? We don't have to worry too much about the block phrasing for right now, but really the key is we're trying to output or puts this exact string. Right? Let's scroll down a little bit more. Okay, right? So this is, there's not a lot going on in this file, but like this is a good general practice to get a sense of like where we're failing. Here, this tells us in the spec file, like what line that we're failing, but sometimes it will also point to a line in your code. So it gives you a sense of like where to look in terms of solving the problem, right? Anybody know what these colors here mean? The green versus the red?
Red is expected and the green is actual received.
Yeah, so the green is what the tests are expecting. Wait, I think I always get this backwards. The red is what the tests are expecting and the green is what your method is doing. Yes, for some reason it feels counterintuitive to me. So Sandy, programs are dumb. Right? They don't know how to do very much. So when they have tests, they're pretty opinionated and they have to match exactly. So literally what's happening here is that I think there's one minor difference between these 2 strings and that's just causing us to fail here, right? Do you see the difference?
Yeah.
Right? So it's just a matter of punctuation, right? If you update the punctuation in your method, this one should be passing. Let's go ahead and try that.
Update the method here, you're saying?
No, so we don't want to change this code here. This is just our output, but this is saying, hey, this is what the tests are expecting my method to output, but this is what it's actually outputting, right? So they're expecting for there to be a comma in this string that's being outputted, but there's not, right? Everything else I think looks identical, but we're just right. We need those strings to match 100%. Okay. Right. And then if we save that and run, you should be passing the very first one. I don't know if I want to do the second method with you here because I don't know if you've had a chance to attempt it. But this one is pointing to you needing to write a second method, one that's called introduction with language, and that's going to have its own logic.
Okay.
Got it? Right. And then when you have that one passing, once those 2 methods are, you should be able to trigger this light flip and then submit. Cool. Right.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Right. You can go ahead and unshare. All right. And then I think it's still the 5 of us here. Anyone else? Is there a lab that you'd like to look at? I know I got a lot of questions about the Parrot lab today, that squawking lab. If you weren't able to make it to the study group, we talked about that a little bit.
I have one. I have
Sure.
one now that you offered. Yeah, I just remember the string interpolation.
That lab?
Yeah, I know I'm probably behind a lot of people, but yeah, I'm way back in the beginning. String interpolation is where I totally got Swamp. I don't think I understand what interpolation means.
Gotcha. Right. Anyone want to take that one when we talk about interpolating? If anyone feels springy and wants to like talk that through. Or maybe Rabaya, I don't know if you're able to share your screen and maybe pull up what you have.
Okay, yeah. Let me see.
That's all right. We can start off in something like a REPL.it, so I can go ahead and share again because I think I have that open somewhere.
I'll share. Okay.
Or did you want to share?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was sort of giving you a couple options in case I was putting you on the spot. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I should. Yeah, I definitely would.
Okay, let me unshare then.
Oh.
So interpolation only works with, is it strings and then it has to be in the quotation marks?
Yeah, so in Ruby, we define strings either with single quotations or double quotations. I'm pretty sure if you're interpolating, you have to use double quotes, if I remember that correctly. But either way is a valid way of defining a string, right? As far as what interpolating means, Rabaya, the idea is just that you have some string that you'd like to inject or perform some Ruby code in. So you need a way of signaling, hey, in this point in the string, I want to inject some Ruby value.
Okay. Okay. All right. Where did I get stuck at?
I think this is a README rather than a lab. Were you stuck on a lab?
Oh, I thought it was saying down here something about dropping in the IRB. So I opened the sandbox.
Okay.
I copied and pasted this into the sandbox, right?
You should be able to do that. Yep.
Yeah, and then what was supposed to happen?
Well, here's what I'm thinking. If you take this code and you paste it into the sandbox with no other content, right. You're probably going to get an undefined local variable or method error. So let's actually do that, right? Because that's a fairly common error that we want to be able to parse. You're going to need, so not in your actual file. This is a README. This is not designed to take in Ruby.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Any files that have .rb in the name, those are Ruby files, but you might want to go into IRB here if you want to play with some Ruby code.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wait, so how do
I? So we can't run Ruby code directly in the console. If we hit enter, it's going to kind of complain that it doesn't know what to do. So here's another thing that we could do. Let's go ahead and make a new file. Let's click this button here. Right, so we could make a new file. We just have to make sure it ends in .rb in order to run Ruby code.
Okay, so name this file string interpolation.
You can call it whatever you want. You can do like string interpolation.rb. You can't have spaces in the name though. You'd have to use an underscore. I think you might still have a space. I can't totally tell. Let's just call it that string.rb. It doesn't matter too much. We just need a file that we can run. Okay, cool. Then we hit enter. We should have a file. Perfect, right? Then we can open that file. Right? So then if you take this code and you paste it here, now we need a way of executing this code, right? We don't have any tests in this context, so there's no learn test to run. We need a way to run this file. We have to either kind of delete this code or hit enter so we can do something else. So go ahead and hit enter. It's going to throw an error, but that's fine. right? So it doesn't know what that is, right? Just because we're not in a Ruby console, it says, I don't know what that command is. What we can do though, is we can run our file with the Ruby command. So if you type in Ruby and then a space and the name of this file, it will execute when you run that command.
Like that?
Well, yeah, it's got to match 100%. Like I was saying before, code is dumb. Like it's got to literally be that file name.
Like that, rb.rb.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to see when we do that, we get an error. We get what's called an undefined local variable or method error, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know what this num of attendees is. We haven't defined this anywhere, right? So what we would have to do first, Rabaya, is define that variable so that when this line runs, right, Ruby can actually do some Ruby inside of this interpolation, right? Because this is just a plain old string, but when we see this sort of hashtag and curly brace syntax, that's how we signal we want to run some Ruby code in that string.
So I have to define, like here, right? Define here.
Oh, well, we don't have to define a method. We just have to define this variable. So we could do something like num of attendees equals.
Oh, okay.
Right, and just pick a number for right now. Okay, now the only other thing is that code runs sequentially. It's going to go from top to bottom. So if we run this code, we still get this error because on this line, num of attendees doesn't exist yet. So we have to kind of define it first and then do that puts line. Just watch your syntax. There we go.
Yeah, like that?
Yep, and then let's go ahead and run.
Do I have to write Ruby?
Yeah, if you hit the top arrow key on your keyboard, it should show you what you typed last in the terminal. Perfect. Yep, and then it did the thing. So we just didn't have enough context. You needed to define that variable.
Okay. All right. And I have a question about terminology. So this lower portion of the screen is called the IRB.
So this is called your terminal. You can run IRB. You'll hear some people call it the console as well. I think of that as like a JavaScript thing, but you'll hear it sort of used regardless of language. I would call this a terminal. Okay,
and anytime we're doing Ruby, we have to create a Ruby file.
Yeah, and a lot of times for labs, it's been created for you, but if you have the sandbox, that tends to come that comes up empty. So like in the context of the sandbox, you can make a new file if you want to poke around in that file.
Oh,
but
okay.
In labs, for right now at least, the files will be pre-made once you open the lab up.
And is the sandbox and the IDE the same thing?
It's the same. Yeah, it's the same software, but like when you're working on a lab, a lot of that has been pre-built for you, whereas the sandbox is literally just that. It kind of starts out
just a plain.
Cool.
Okay.
Right. Angel and John, are there any labs or things that you had questions on that you wanted to look at?
Not right now, because I kind of got stuck, but you walked. I just had a name blank. Bear with me one moment. I don't want to say her name wrong. Sandy. Right? Okay. Yeah. You walked me through it, which unstuck me. So I'm good.
Gotcha. So I think in that case, if you guys don't have questions, what I want to do for anyone who's like willing to kind of stay is maybe we try some Ruby challenges, just to sort of keep things simple but fun, but get some practice coding. Let's have you unshare your screen, Rabaya. Okay, cool. So then I can share, and I've got this open. Where is all my stuff? Oh, I always get very turned around by like the actual video stuff. It covers what I need, and then I don't know what to do. But okay, cool. So what I have pulled up here, so this is just kind of a general code practice site. There are a number of different sites. This is just one that I like in particular. It's called Code Wars, and you can kind of practice code challenges in a variety of languages. These are the ones that I kind of picked, but you have other options to choose from. And what I was thinking is that we might work on just some simple stuff in Ruby. The one thing though is that there's not, well, they do have tests to work with. Can I find something easier though? Right, it's kind of like diving into the deep end because there's a lot happening here, but basically like the easy stuff are 8s and 7s. And maybe, we'll see. You know, this is what the full-time cohort did in their open office hours. Is this one I did already? Oh, it's not. Training. No, I don't want to do any math stuff. I think this one is simple. Maybe 5 months. Just whole numbers. Well, oh yeah, that's not one that I passed, so maybe it's not that easy. String. Oh, this is JavaScript. Can I pick one? Just Ruby. It'll take a second to reload. I think. Some of this stuff you guys haven't seen yet, though. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but now I look through, it seems less fun. It's just like a suggestion I got. We'll see. Numbers ending. That's gonna take, well, numbers ending with 0s are boring. They might be fun in your world, but not here. This is one that I tried to do. I guess this could be something that we could play around with if you're open to it and poking around. If this is not helpful, I'm totally fine with not doing this, and like we can end early if you guys want to work on labs, or if there's literally anything else code-based we can work on. This is just sort of in the spirit of like us hanging out and doing something related to Ruby code. So what do y'all want to do? What are y'all into?
Would you maybe like, I guess, test us on the stuff we've learned so far, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard because you guys are not all in the same place. But you make a valid concern, or I can't English today apparently, but so we can, I suppose, work in a Replit and see what we can do there.
Well, me and Sandy are in the same cohort, right?
We're all in the same cohort, but you guys are, yeah, we're all in the same cohort and we have the same assignments, but you guys are just not all in the same place in the curriculum.
Like,
so,
all right.
So I guess
I think if whatever we do, it'll be a learning curve for me who is probably behind. And it'll be a challenge for someone who's there or past there. I think anything would be beneficial.
Got it. Right. So I guess here's what I think would be the most helpful. This is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of this Parrot Lab. Some of you guys might not be there, but that's a sticking point, something that people find tricky. I know we did talk about it in the study group earlier. So for some of you, that might be a repeat, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not valuable because I find that it's kind of tricky in general. So it might be nice to kind of go through that together and kind of like, let's look at the errors. What is it talking about? Because there's kind of, it's definitely a lab that trips students up. So I think that might actually be a good idea, because that's really, if we think about what you guys have been assigned so far, that's putting a lot of these main concepts together. This is a different thing. This is how I update your guys' dashboard. Okay, so if we get here, the one thing though is for some reason Ruby commands are running really slow on my machine.
What lab is this called?
So this lab, it's the methods and return values lab. If we go into your track, it would be nice if they kind of kept the naming conventions consistent, because this one's called Parrot, but it's not listed as that. It should be, oh, it's the return values lab. That's what it is, right? So I think I was working, we adjusted this code earlier, but we're gonna pretend that didn't happen, right? And we're gonna sort of just use test-driven development to kind of take us forward in what we're trying to accomplish, right? And then there were, yes, well, there are still 4 of us. It's a little bit challenging because you guys are kind of all over the place. I have people who they've already finished everything. I have people coming from other cohorts who've done a whole bunch, and then some people who are fresh, and that's good. It's just a little interesting to plan around, right? So this is kind of that error we were talking about before, Rabaya, a nice general, like you've got some variable or method and it's not defined. I don't know what it is, right? It's a local variable or method error, right? So in this case, in terms of like what we're making out here in our error messages, right? We get a general sense of the task. This is telling me that the tests are looking for a method called Parrot, and they're expecting that it's gonna output squawk to the terminal when called without any arguments. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here, right? I need to define a method. So how do I do that? I need my method signature, right? Right? This is sort of where we start as far as defining a method, right? I know that it's got to output something, right? So generally that's going to be puts. So we're going to kind of start with the simplest version and then fix things as we go along. So I'm just going to say, hey, literally this is going to put squawk.
Oh,
right? And then it's talking about arguments. So it's saying like, if I don't provide any arguments to my method, it should output that squawk, right? So without knowing anything else, I kind of feel like I did the thing, but let's see what we get when we run that error.
well, doesn't Parrot have the equals when you're defining? Maybe
you might be thinking about default arguments, but let's see. I feel like I should have like the Jeopardy music when I'm waiting for the test to run.
Right.
Right? So here I do this too, right? Like it wants that string to match 100%. It's complaining because I don't have this exclamation mark. Right? So we just kind of, we adjust things, we run the tests again, we see what we're working with. It tells me a little bit about like where my code is failing, right? We call this the stack trace, right? So it knew exactly where the problem was. It was on line 4, right? That's one of the things that we can get from our error messages, right? Now, this is where we get into some of the good stuff, right? So this all has stayed the same, right? This part here tells me a little bit about what the tests are doing. The tests are calling my method. They're expecting when they call it that what they get back is squawk. So they're looking for a return value, right? So this is saying, hey, I'm expecting your method to return squawk, but right now it's returning nil, right? Anybody remember why this is returning nil? If you were in a study group earlier.
Oh, isn't Parrot supposed to equal something? No.
Well, we're gonna want to ultimately define an argument here. If we look at the README, this is why I actually say always look at the README first, because they give you guidance. They try to save you a headache. it tells us this method, let me make this bigger. I tend to have it small because in Ask the Question, I worked at Ask the Question for a long time, and it just lets you see a lot of questions at once if you kind of zoom out a lot. But it's saying it should accept an argument of a string and both puts that string and return that string. So it's looking for both pieces. So it's saying, hey, if I define this method to take an argument, right, it should do two different things, right? Yeah. Now, we talk about this in the study group. I don't like calling this an argument, but people are going to mix those terms up. They're going to use them interchangeably. I would call this a parameter. I would call it something nice and basic, but descriptive, right? Something that helps me remember what's being passed in here, right? So a lot of times, like the test is pretty good at sending you in the right direction. They say, define your method to take a string. So I'm going to call this string, right? Now they're expecting that whatever that string is, we're going to do two things with it. We're going to puts it and we're going to return it, right? I'm going to do this the wrong way first so that we can talk about like why it doesn't work. I'm going to go ahead and return this string. I'm actually going to do it this way first. And then I'm going to put the same string. I don't know. Anyone have any guesses about what this code is going to do when I run it?
It's wrong because isn't return supposed to go after the end?
Well, not quite, but you're kind of on the right track though, right? Oh, so first I get an argument error, which is fun, right? So we actually want this method to take a default argument, right? Some of you aren't at this point in the curriculum yet, and that's okay. It's not a hard concept. It just makes for confusing errors, right? So when we define a method to take a default argument, all we do is we take that argument or parameter and we say, hey, if I don't pass something to this method when I call it, I want you to default to whatever is in this string, right? So they want this to default to squawk, right? So I'm going to go ahead and like not run the test, but run this file so that you see. I'm going to get rid of this for right now, right? I'm going to call my method two different ways. I'm going to call it with no argument, and then I'm going to go ahead and call it with some other argument. This is like my word for the day, so I keep using that in study groups, right? So when we go through and run this, if I do Ruby and then the name of my file, which is parrot.rb, right? It does both things, right? Because I've said like, hey, you can call this method with an argument. This totally works, but don't break if I don't provide it a default. If I take this out, right? Any parameters here are required. So that means when I call the method, they have to be provided or it's going to break. If I save this and run it again, I'll get an error, right? I get an argument error specifically, right? If you weren't in the study group earlier, this is an error that confuses students a lot. 100% of the time, expected is how you define your method. My method is expecting one argument because I told it to take one in, right? So we're saying like, what's going on here? I'm expecting an argument, but you called me without anything, right? And it tells me where to look, right? It says, hey, look in line 3, there's something going on here, right? If I look in line, well, I guess here it's just kind of referring back to the method definition. Oh, but it also says, hey, what's up on line 8? That's where we're calling it without any argument. Right? Does that kind of make sense? That process is like, hey, we got this error. Where do we look? It looks like something's going on in line 8, right? That's what I'm doing here. And then it takes me back to the origin because it's kind of like these two things don't match with each other. We're expecting one, but then we're only passing nothing, right? So the easiest way to get around that is just to set a default because it gives you some flexibility, right? If you're like 80% with me, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, it's easy. Well, so I'm used to seeing faces, but like a blank face could mean like, I'm so bored, I might die. Or it could mean like, I have no idea what's going on. Please don't ask me questions. I feel alone and afraid. So it's nice to kind of check in. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm lost. I'm sorry, my webcam, it's on its way, so I'm not gonna be able to have it today.
That's all right.
I'm not following why Parrot has a parameter. Like, why is it having a parameter twice? Maybe because I'm not there yet.
Can you tell me which line of code you're looking at?
Line 3 and line 9.
Okay. So
you have a parameter for both.
Yeah.
And I don't know why.
It's okay. So this is a parameter. This is me saying, hey, this is some variable that represents my input, right? If I call my method, I'm expecting that I'm going to pass something in. It's going to be some data, right? The test will, in many cases, will provide that. But here we're just calling our method, right? So when we define a parameter, we're giving ourselves the option to pass an argument when we call the method, right? When we use a default, when we do this equals and set it to something, we're saying like, hey, if I don't pass something, this is what I want the fallback to be. So if I call this method with no argument, I want you to go ahead and default to this value here.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's really just giving us flexibility, right? So I wanted to talk about that first, because sometimes it's like the tests add their own layer of complexity. So sometimes it's helpful to just kind of look at what the code does when we run it without thinking about the tests for a second, right? Why am I trying to erase things? That's not how this works. So then if we, sorry?
So now that you explained that, can you open up your terminal again so I can see some? So Ruby Parrot RB. Oh, okay. All right, I see it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to go ahead and run the test now. I'm hoping this is helpful. I like this lab because it's confusing and it kind of puts stuff together. Totally okay if you feel a little lost because it's ahead of where you might be.
Do you suggest to do learn, pass, fail the way you do it, or just write learn, submit?
Well, so those do different things. So in terms of running your tests, there's a few different things you can do. You can do learn, and that will run all the tests. You can do learn test, which is identical. It's going to run all the tests. I am impatient, and I also like focusing on one error at a time. I like using this command, learn fail, fast, because it just takes you to the first thing that's failing. So you can kind of work on that thing first, right? Get that passing and be on to the next thing. It runs a little bit faster because you're not going through as many tests. It doesn't really make a difference now, but when you get to labs later on, some labs have dozens of tests. So it takes a little while to run it, and you don't want to do that over and over again. It just kind of feels like you're spending your time watching tests run. And I'm even lazier, so I like using the shortened version of this. It does the same thing, right? So it just takes you to the very first thing that's failing. I also find it's fairly common for students to not know which error to look at. And generally, we recommend going in order. So like fail fast is nice because it's going to take you to the next thing. So you can do that thing and then worry about what's failing next. So it's more like they're all valid ways of doing the same thing. I just have a preference for this one. But they're both fine. Like when we're talking about 2 or 3 tests, it doesn't matter too much. Right? Now here, what the heck is this complaining about? Oh, okay. So here, it's like we're failing some things, but then for some reason, we're not outputting this phrase. It doesn't seem like our puts is getting run, right? It's saying we expect your program to receive a puts with squawk, and for some reason that's not happening, right? That seems a little counterintuitive at first, but let me try to explain. Replit one would be probably nice for this. Let's say I do the same thing we're doing here, know where I have that open actually. Let's do it here. So if I run this file, I can guarantee that nothing is going to be outputs when I run this, right? If I do ruby parrot.rb, it's going to be like nothing happened, right? That's a little confusing at first. It sort of underscores this idea that order matters in code. How many of you have gotten to like the return values section? Yeah, because some of you guys are still on the methods and stuff. Yeah, Angel?
Yes, I have.
Gotcha, yeah. So one thing about Ruby that's different from other coding languages, I don't know how many of you did boot camp prep or you've done JavaScript or have other knowledge. Ruby is pretty unique in that it has implicit return values. So by default, a Ruby method is going to return the last line of code run. So we often don't even need this return keyword here at all, right? It'll return what's there, right? Another thing that also, you guys probably noticed this, but I didn't. I commented out the puts. We'd still have the same issue if we ran it this way. It's still not going to puts. I just kind of shot myself in the foot there. It still doesn't work. It was just not working for the reason I thought it was, right? When we use a return keyword in Ruby or JavaScript or anything, when your code reads this line, it will return this and then exit your method, right? So no matter what I got going down here, if I do this 25 times, none of this code is ever going to be read because I have this return here, right? When it hits return in our program, this gets returned and then we exit, right? If I were to do that in, let's use IRB. Right, so if I paste that here, okay, I've just defined my method. It's defined, this is its return value. Now let me go ahead and call that method. I'm just gonna use their default for now, that's fine. It returns a value because this arrow here always means returns. What it didn't do is puts that value. Putting it looks a little bit different. If I want these puts to be read, I need to do this last, right? So if I take that same code and I add it in here, I'm overwriting that old method. I've got a new parrot method now. If I go ahead and call that method, right, that's a little bit different. It's got a return value because that arrow says this is what my method or code returns. And then these are all those putses, right? So that's kind of one thing as far as using explicit returns. If you actually use this return keyword, it's going to return that thing and then exit, right? Which a lot of times it's fine, but Ruby is smart in that it will do the same exact thing if you remove that return keyword. So this code here is going to work exactly the same, right? If I go ahead and call this method, it's still going to do the same thing. So Ruby methods by default are going to return the last line of code that's run. So here that's a string, so it returns that string. If I take that string away and I just put this, right, what do we think this method will return when I run it?
So you said the last string is what it returns.
So the last line of code that's run in the method. It doesn't necessarily have to be a string. In this case, it is a string because that's all I'm doing is messing with strings here, but it's the last line of code run in the method. So puts itself, this kind of confuses students a lot. Puts outputs something. Whatever, can I spell that right? A puts outputs something, right? It does the thing, but it always returns nil, right? 100% of the time, that's its return value. So if I run this code here, right? If I call my method, which it doesn't seem to want to do, right? It's going to return nil because the last line of code that's evaluated is this line, which is a puts, and a puts returns nil.
And nil means error?
It doesn't mean, it's not that it means an error, it's just like, it's a nothing. It's not something that I can like do something with potentially, right? And sometimes that's fine. If you want to just kind of make a simple, so like later in this course, you guys are going to make a tic-tac-toe game, right? If you think about playing it on your terminal, you might greet the user like, hey, what's your name? Pick X or O. Like, it's a nice way to give instructions when you run a program, but it's not something you can really do much more with, right? Whereas a return value, you can store it and do stuff with it later. So that's, I think, the biggest difference. So like the challenge with this lab is just making sure you understand the difference, right? But they want both. They want you to put that string, but they also want you to return that string, right? Because they're checking to see if you know the difference. If you do it this way, this will fail, right? And let me show you why. Right? What would we expect this method to return? Also, hey, Stephanie, I see that you joined us. You're welcome to put on your video cam if you feel comfortable with that, or if you have any questions. We're really just kind of hanging out and like, yeah, welcome, nice to meet you. We're just kind of playing around with code. Open office hours are kind of whatever we want to make it. We can do code challenges. If you guys have questions, I can answer them. We debug some of our labs, like little things that were driving people crazy. So it's kind of whatever we want. Okay. So, Rabaya?
I'm a little confused there. You're saying what do we expect to return, but we didn't return anything.
Yeah, so because in Ruby has implicit returns. So like the methods have a default behavior. They're going to return the last line of code run, right? So this method is going to return nil because a puts returns nil. And I have a puts as the last line of my method.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this is failing. It's saying like, hey, I'm checking your return value, right? I'm calling your method and I want it to equal this. It's not getting that because this is out of order. We want to puts the string, but our return value has to be the last line, right? So order matters, right? So then if I go ahead and I run this guy.
Now the return squad.
Jeopardy sounds. Just envision in your head when you watch the test get ready to run, there's Jeopardy sounds in the background.
So put strings has to be before string.
Yes, right? Because the return value by definition is going to be the last line of code run in the method, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the last line in the method 100% of the time because we can have a lot going on in this method. You guys are probably not here yet, but like, let's say we do something like an if statement. So if it's equal to this, let's say we're going to return, yo, I'm just making up strings at this point, yo, otherwise, hello, right? So this case, it's not necessarily clear what's the last line is. It's going to depend on kind of how these lines evaluate. We're going to have a study group, I think, on control flow tomorrow, right? So we'll talk more about that. But I guess I really just wanted to underscore that, like, it's not necessarily the last line 100% of the time. Sometimes it is, but it's the last line that gets run. And we'll see kind of examples of that. Let me bring this back to something that doesn't look crazy. Got it. So I think just to underscore here, the order matters, right? Because this is the last line of code run, so it's got to be the return value. If we flip it, it's kind of like this gets returned on this line, but it doesn't stop our program. So this is the last thing that's run. We get a return value of nil. That changes if we use an explicit return, because this guy is like, hold up, when you hit me, I'm going to return that, and then nothing else happens, right? It's kind of a complicated concept in Ruby, implicit and explicit returns. but it'll get easier with practice. Right. I think we're coming up on, or we are on time, but like, I'm happy to take questions or otherwise let you guys go and enjoy your dinner or do some coding, whatever you want to do.
So the nil goes away. Like now that you flipped it, there's nil isn't going to be a default or a, was it default value? Did you say?
Now that you're at a return, the nil, the put is not the default, right?
Well, so the default just has to do with what's going on here. If we use this return keyword, this line of code never gets run.
Never. Right,
because
right. Well, that's what I mean.
Yes, so a return keyword means return this value and exit my method, right? If you use this actual return keyword, right?
If you don't use it, then it won't do that, right? It'll just run put.
If you don't use that return keyword, you're right. It's not going to stop your method, but your method is not going to return the right thing because implicit returns don't affect our method returns unless they're the last line of code run. Right? So like if we run this code here, eventually, right? So like think of an implicit return is it's a little subtler. It does something, but it doesn't do the right thing unless it's the last line of code in your method. If this is implicit, Ruby's going to say like, hey, my default behavior, if you're not using the return keyword, is I'm going to look at the last line of code run in your file, and that's what I'm going to return, right? So we return something on this line, but it doesn't matter because it's not the last line of code run in this method. So we get down here, this returns nil. So that's the return value of our method. It can get confusing. Other coding languages require, like when we get the JavaScript, in JavaScript, you have to return with return keyword. You don't have the option to implicitly return. Okay. All right. Any other questions, concerns, bad jokes?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry if you already covered this, but I just wanted to know, is this meeting right now going to help with the methods lab, like the first big, huge set of labs that we do? Because I'm on the last one and I'm stuck. But once this is posted, I would like to go back and watch it and see if that'll help me understand.
Yeah, I think the video from earlier today will probably help more because we went through more examples there. This is kind of more of like a free flow meeting where we kind of like help people on their specific things. If you go to our Learn Code dashboard, Stephanie, where the heck, I lost there we go. Right, if you ever hit this, I guess it's a lightning bolt. If you click that, it will take you back to your dashboard. Mm-hmm. So if you go ahead and scroll under our calendar or like past our calendar, within 24 hours of any like recorded study group, I'll put the link. So like this is from the study group from noon today. Here we looked at a lot more examples of defining methods and what that looks like. So that's a little more targeted. I would say if you had to choose between the two, like that one's going to be more helpful. We talked about some of that stuff here, but this is also kind of like more of a flowy meeting, whatever we feel like talking about at the time.
Okay, well, that's very helpful. And I can already tell just from like the few minutes that I've been in the class that I can appreciate how you're giving the information because I was in a cohort before, and I feel like this is like learning Arabic with my eyes closed and my hands tied behind my back. So I like that you're relaying the information in a teaching way, not just reading stuff on the screen. I know how to read, but I want to be able to comprehend so that I can do it. And so I feel like just a little bit of time that I've seen, I hear that coming through, and I really appreciate it because I'm going to need help. So I feel like I'm in good hands. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I got to earn my paycheck. And I got to say, I appreciate that compliment because it's really easy for me to feel like I suck at this, right? We're always our worst critics, right? So I'll take any positive feedback I can get. And also, like, it's not this isn't that different from learning Arabic. You're literally learning a new language, right? It's got its own rules, it's got its own flavor. Like, you're not born knowing any of that stuff. So if you ever have the feeling like, is this just me? Probably not, right? Code, like, it's really easy, especially like for online learning, to kind of feel like you're the only one who doesn't get it, or like you're struggling, but I would say that that's the majority. Like, it's just hard, right? It's learnable, right? We can have a process that makes it easier, but like nobody's born knowing like return values. Like, what do I do with that? But
That's literally how I feel.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I could help alleviate that a little bit, and I appreciate the compliment again. All right. I think is it just us ladies now? Because John left us earlier. Any other questions, ladies?
Yeah, I second that, Dominique. I'm just really grateful that you like break it down and you're taking the time to like break down our questions, because it's really helpful, because again, I'm not coming from like a background of knowing anything, and I'm still confused with like a lot of things, but I feel like so much clarity just after today from earlier and then now this session. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think it sometimes can be easy for instructors to forget what it was like when they were at that point. Even like, so with very few exceptions, all of the cohort leads were students at one point. And all of the technical coaches were students at one point. So they had to go through this. It's just kind of like some of them are better at remembering like what it was like to be on the other end of that, and you have to make sense of it. Whereas sometimes people who are like, maybe they're just naturally the best at it, or they're like, they don't struggle. They're just kind of like, methods, that's an easy concept. So they just try to breeze through it. But it's easy once you get it, but like you have to sort of like put things together, and it doesn't really click until you do that. Cool. All right, friends, we've gone over. This has been an I mean, I haven't done an office hours like this before, so I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but it turned out to be pretty productive. Right. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me. I'm going to end this for right now, but if you guys have other questions, like I might not be able to respond to a Slack right away, but like as soon as I'm able, if I'm not in a meeting or like sleeping or whatever, I can like respond as best as I can. Okay?
Okay.
All right. You guys have a great night. Nice to meet you, Stephanie.
You as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.